Welcome smarket.com.au.
Hey everyone, welcome to the 30 Days to Learn Adobe After Effects course. My name is Nguyen, and today in this lesson we're going to be discussing about the timeline within After Effects here. So here we are in After Effects, and as discussed before, we're going to be discussing about the timeline area right here, this region right here. And this is where we're going to be doing most of our work and spend most of our time within the application. So this is where all of our media assets and all of our layers are stored in the composition. Now the project media panel holds all these files in a bin, but they're not any good unless we use them in our composition. So in order to get them into the timeline, you're going to need to create a new composition. So let's go to composition, new composition, and we'll just call this main comp. And I'll just change my width to 1280 and my height to 720, and this is just kind of standard 720p definition resolution. And we'll just hit OK. So now we have a composition. So now that we have a workspace to kind of work in, our composition to work in, we can actually now drag our footage or our layer or whatever you have into the composition panel timeline right here. So now our media assets are stored and used in our main composition. So right off the bat, you'll notice that we have the layer name here, or the source name, which is our waveinbirds.mov here. We have a generic number here just to see how many layers we have in our composition. We also have a very useful kind of color cube right here, or square I should say, to kind of organize our layers a little bit better, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now we also have our lock switch right here, which kind of pretty much just locks our layer, so we can't really do anything with it. We can't move it around. We have our solo layer, which is just going to solo our layer by itself here. So if I just drag in another footage, you can see that we have two footages in our main composition in our timeline. And if we just solo the bottom one, you'll see that it's just going to solo and just show us the wave and birds MOV. Likewise with the ducks MOV here. Now next to that, we have our audio switch right here. So, maybe your footage contains audio. You can pretty much disable that audio by clicking on the switch and it'll be gone. We also have our visibility switch right here, which just pretty much shows and disables our media file or our layer correspondingly. So maybe we want to see just the wave and birds video, or maybe we just want to temporarily just disable and not show our ducks.mov layer. We can simply just unclick on the visibility switch, and it's just going to hide our layer temporarily. Now it doesn't delete it, it just temporarily disables the preview, so you won't see it. So pretty cool. Now you can actually rename your source files here, and give it a nickname by hitting enter on your keyboard, and we can change this to maybe footage 1. And then we can hit enter again and call this footage 2. So it's pretty cool how you can kind of give your layer name kind of a nickname without actually changing the actual file in our project media panel here. Now on the right side, you have your blending modes, pretty standard here. Now on the right side of that, we have some more advanced options, which we'll be covering separately in another lesson. But we have our track mats and our parenting tools right here, which is the pick whip and then kind of the layer for our parent. Now above these options, we actually have additional options, which are some kind of the main key features that we'll be using quite a bit in our workflow, which include maybe the shy switch right here, which kind of hides layers if you have a ton of them. So for example, if I just duplicate these layers, maybe you want to hide certain layers because they're not very useful for you in this particular case. We can toggle switches / modes, and that's just going to bring us more options here. So first, if you want to shy some layers, we can go into the shy switch right here. And maybe we want to make all these layers shy right here. So we're going to click on this little shy switch. And then we're going to click on the enable or hide all layers with the shy switch set. And that's just going to hide all of those layers. Now again, they're not actually deleted and they're not actually gone. They're actually still visible and everything. They're just not shown in our timeline. So it's a very nice way to hide certain layers that you may not need at the time in your timeline. Now we also have additional options such as to enable frame blending, again, which we'll be talking about a little bit later, as well as motion blur, brainstorm, auto keyframe properties, and of course the graph editor, which we'll be discussing a little bit later in another lesson individually. So over here we have, again, the shy switch. We have the rasterization switch right here, which we'll be talking about a little bit later, or collapse transformation. This is the quality switch, which we can pretty much change the quality now. After Effects handles footage pretty well, but maybe you have like 4K footage or something, and maybe you don't want to see, the full res image. We can switch to a more draft version of it. As you see here, it looks a little bit more degraded for faster previewing. Now I want to discuss the relationship between these switches right here and these master switches up here. Now, I call them master switches because they're kind of the main switches that control everything in the composition. These options right here control the composition, features. And these are kind of enablers for our particular individual layers. For example, similar to this shy switch, you see how we have to enable the shy switch for individual layers. And then to finally enable them in the composition, we have to enable the master switch. And that's just going to hide everything and take everything into effect. Very similar to motion blur. If you want motion blur, you just can't enable the master switch. You have to individually select the individual layers that you want motion blur to be applied, and then enable the motion blur switch, and that's just going to enable motion blur. You can't do one or without the other. You need both, and you especially need the master comp or the master switch to be pressed if you want any of this to actually occur. Now that's not always the case, for example, with the 3D cube right here, but we'll be discussing about that a little bit later. So let's go ahead and move to the right side here. And this is the actual timeline where we have some actual time indicators and time rulers, and we can change our duration, stuff like that. So first off, how the heck do you make a cut? Well, as you can see here, each individual layer has its own duration. These footage right here can have around a 14-second duration, while these have beyond a 20-second duration here. So I'm going to go ahead and extend our timeline. So let's go to composition settings, and we'll change this duration to maybe around 50. We'll zoom out. And now you can see the end of the footage duration right here. So to trim layers, we can simply just drag the ends over like this, and maybe trim it from the front. And notice how you'll see like a transparent bar here. And that's telling us that yes, there's still footage left over, we just trimmed the area. Now you can actually kind of displace this kind of transparent bar over a little bit, like that. So it's just going to start right here. So pretty much the solid bar is just a time indicator for After Effects to know when the footage is starting. And then we can actually offset the actual footage on the starting points by sliding these over here. So maybe you want this part of the footage to be kind of visible here. So we want to trim 10 seconds in like this. And then we can slide the end over here. And that's just going to play the last 10 seconds of our footage. Or we can just scoot this thing over here. And it's going to play the first 10 seconds of our footage here. So that's how you make basic cuts and edits. And then of course you can individually drag layers, in timeline. Now remember, these are actual layers as well. So they behave very similar to Photoshop layers and video editor layers. Pretty much whatever's on top shows first or displays first, and then anything under that displays second, so on and so forth. So it's kind of like a pancake effect. So once one layer's duration is over, it's going to turn off and shut off, and it's going to go to the next footage right here, as you see here. Now the timeline also has some additional options. If you actually click on a layer, or maybe click on the actual duration of a layer, you can actually right click and you'll bring up a whole bunch more options. For an example, you can bring up the time properties here. You can bring up the transform, mask, quality, switches, as we discussed before, the shy switch and all that stuff, the solo, motion blur. So there are actually a lot more options in the timeline than you may know. But again, I won't be explaining all this in this lesson because it's going to make a lot more sense once we figure out individually what all these things do. And then we can come back here, and this is kind of like a shortcut hub where you can apply effects faster and so on and so forth. So this has just been a really quick overview of the timeline in After Effects. Hopefully it wasn't too complicated for you. I tried to break it down as best as I could. If you guys have any further questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the forums. I'll get to them as soon as I can. In the next lesson, we're going to be talking about effects in After Effects, how to apply them, control them, and how effects are rendered within After Effects. So once again, guys, my name is VinhSon. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Bye, guys.